Part 2 War Regent Thulos had barely survived the explosion that destroyed his flagship. His body was bruised and his pride was wounded even worse than his flesh. He now commanded from a backup ship that was smaller and less impressive than his previous vessel. The ship was broadcasting emergency signals to the rest of his fleet. In his 300 years of leading armies and conquering systems, he had never seen a weapon like the one the humans used. One shot had destroyed his greatest ship. One single shot from one single weapon had torn through armor that should have been impossible to penetrate. Thulos demanded answers from his officers. His voice was ragged and angry. The weapons master studied the data from their sensors and gave his report. He said that the projectile was solid matter that had been accelerated using electromagnetic force. There was no plasma involved and no energy shielding around the projectile. It was just raw kinetic force hitting them at incredible speed. The weapons master said that the human ship must have enormous power generation to achieve that kind of velocity. The math suggested power systems far beyond anything the Crythians possessed. Thulos narrowed his 4 eyes and tried to think clearly through his anger and shock. He told himself that it was just one lucky shot. The humans had probably used all their power for that one attack. He ordered his fleet to surround the human ship from all sides. He wanted every ship to fire at exactly the same moment. Surely the humans could not stop 300 ships firing together. But even as he gave the order, doubt crept into his mind like poison. The human ship had not moved after destroying the flagship. It just floated there in space, waiting, as if it wanted them to attack again. On the bridge of the Defiant, Jake Morrison watched the Crythian fleet moving into position. The sensor displays showed the enemy ships forming a sphere that surrounded his vessel completely. Lieutenant Kate Freeman worked at the tactical station and reported what she was seeing. She said the Crythians were trying to box them in and cut off every possible escape route. Her voice carried a question even though she did not ask it directly. Jake looked at the display and told Kate to let them finish their formation. He stood up from his command chair and walked to the forward viewport. His hands were clasped behind his back in a relaxed posture. He looked out at the enemy fleet surrounding them and spoke clearly. He told the helm officer to bring them to full combat speed. Then he told Ensign Chris Murphy to plot a vector straight through the Crythian formation. The words were simple, but the meaning was shocking. Chris hesitated for just a moment. His hands hovered over his controls. He repeated the order back to Jake as a question, asking if he really meant straight through the enemy fleet. Jake confirmed the order with complete calm. He said straight through, and his tone left no room for doubt. The Defiant's engines flared to full power and the battleship accelerated forward. The Crythian ships opened fire all at once. Hundreds of weapons fired from every direction. Plasma bolts, missiles, energy beams, and projectile weapons all converged on the single human ship. It looked like enough firepower to destroy a planet, but the Defiant moved like nothing the Crythians had ever encountered before. Its inertial dampening systems allowed the ship to make turns and maneuvers that would have torn any other vessel apart. The battleship twisted and rolled through space like a dancer performing in a storm. It dove between incoming fire and spun around obstacles that appeared in fractions of a second. The railgun fired again, and another Crythian ship exploded into debris. The weapon fired a third time and a third ship died. Each shot was perfectly aimed. Each target was destroyed completely. The Defiant's point defense lasers carved through smaller attack craft like a hot knife through butter. The smaller ships exploded or broke apart, adding to the growing cloud of debris in the battle space. Missile pods opened along the flanks of the human battleship. Dozens of smart munitions launched and screamed into the Crythian formation. Each missile had its own brain and could track targets independently. They adjusted their courses to avoid countermeasures and found new targets when their original ones were destroyed. Kate Freeman watched her displays and reported that the Crythian formation was breaking apart. Multiple ships were turning away and trying to retreat. Some ships were accelerating to faster than light speed to escape the battle. The perfect sphere formation had collapsed into chaos in less than 10 minutes. Jake's expression remained completely neutral. He told Kate to let the retreating ships go. He said they were not here to conquer anyone or destroy entire fleets. They were just here to pass through this system and continue on their way. His voice was calm and matter-of-fact, as if the battle had been a minor inconvenience rather than a fight against 300 warships. The battle ended as quickly as it had started. The Crythian armada scattered in all directions like frightened birds. Of their original 300 ships, 47 had been completely destroyed. Over 100 more were damaged, some critically. Many were venting atmosphere or had lost main power. The USS Defiant floated in the center of the debris field without a scratch on its hull. The shields had not even been lowered at any point during the fight. Thulos watched from his backup command ship as the human vessel continued moving on its original course. The Defiant was not chasing the fleeing Crythian ships. It was not celebrating victory or broadcasting threats. It simply proceeded forward as if nothing important had happened. The battleship moved at steady speed through the system, following the path it had announced at the beginning. Thulos felt something he had not experienced in 300 years of warfare. He felt genuine fear, not fear of death in battle, which was honorable. He felt fear of the unknown, fear of an enemy that was so far beyond his understanding that all his experience meant nothing. He realized that the humans had been holding back. They could have destroyed the entire fleet if they wanted to. Instead, they had just removed the obstacle in their path and moved on. He ordered his communications officer to open a channel to the Galactic Council. His voice was quiet now, all the arrogance gone. He said that the Council needed to know about this immediately. They needed to understand what had just happened. A new power had entered the galaxy and everything was about to change. The old rules no longer applied. The old assumptions about strength and weakness were wrong. The communications officer worked quickly to establish a secure channel. Thulos began composing his report and tried to find words to describe what he had witnessed. How could he explain that 300 warships had been defeated by one? How could he make them understand that the humans had not even been trying very hard? He knew that many would not believe him. They would think he was making excuses for a shameful defeat. But he had to try. The galaxy needed to be warned. Part 3, the Galactic Council convened on the neutral station called Concordia. The massive ring habitat orbited a blue giant star and served as neutral ground for all the major civilizations. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the great amphitheater. Their various forms of communication were all translated by advanced artificial intelligence systems, so everyone could understand each other. The chamber was huge and circular, with seats arranged in rising tiers so everyone could see the central speaking platform. High Speaker Valara of the Qualix called the emergency session to order. Her body was made of living crystal that refracted light into rainbow patterns as she moved. Her voice resonated through the chamber in a way that commanded attention without being loud. She explained that they had received disturbing reports from the Crythian territories. War Regent Thulos was claiming that a single human warship had destroyed or damaged nearly half of his armada. The numbers seemed impossible, but multiple sources were confirming the story. Murmurs rippled through the assembly like waves on water. Representatives turned to each other and spoke in dozens of different languages. The Crythians were feared across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their military might was legendary. The idea that one ship could defeat 300 of their vessels seemed like fantasy or propaganda. But High Speaker Valara would not have called an emergency session without good reason. Ambassador Narux of the Villani stood up from his seat. His species was tall and thin with skin that shimmered like metal. His voice was sharp with disbelief when he spoke. He declared that the report was impossible to believe. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 30 of their years ago. They were barely more than primitives who had just learned to leave their home system. They were playing with technology they barely understood. There was no way they could build weapons capable of defeating the Crythians. Valara's crystalline body seemed to glow brighter for a moment. She said that the evidence was clear and undeniable. They had sensor logs from 14 independent sources. All the data agreed on the basic facts. The human ship was alone. It was outnumbered 300 to 1. And it had won decisively. The Crythian fleet had scattered and fled. 47 ships were destroyed and over 100 were damaged. These were facts, not opinions. Norux laughed, but the sound was bitter and angry. He asked if the humans had really won or if the Crythians had simply been incompetent. Perhaps Thulos had grown soft after centuries of easy victories. Perhaps his crews were poorly trained. There had to be some explanation other than accepting that humans were suddenly a military power. Before anyone could answer, the chamber doors opened. Everyone turned to look. A human walked in, flanked by 2 security officers who were not human. She wore a simple navy blue uniform with minimal decoration. There were no medals or ribbons or signs of rank beyond a simple insignia. Her name was Lisa Grant, and she was Earth's first official ambassador to the Galactic Council. She had been trying to get humanity recognized for 5 years while the council debated and delayed. Lisa spoke clearly, and her voice carried across the amphitheater without any amplification. She apologized for interrupting, but said she believed she could provide some context that might be helpful. Her tone was polite but firm. She was not asking permission. She was simply doing what needed to be done. Valara gestured toward the speaking platform and invited Lisa to approach. Her crystalline form flickered with colors that might have indicated surprise or curiosity. She commented that Lisa's timing was remarkable. The human ambassador had appeared at exactly the right moment to address the council's concerns. Lisa walked to the platform with confident steps. She admitted that she had been monitoring the session. When she heard what they were discussing, she thought it would be best to address their concerns directly rather than letting rumors and speculation spread. She looked around at the assembled species, meeting their eyes or optical sensors or whatever they used to perceive the world. She wanted them to see that she was not afraid and not apologizing. Lisa explained that the USS Defiant was not looking for a fight. Commander Morrison had been following established space lanes and attempting peaceful passage through Krithian territory. The Krithians had demanded tribute and threatened to board the ship. When Morrison refused, they opened fire first. The humans had simply defended themselves. Everything that happened after that was a result of Krithian aggression, not human expansion. Naruk stood again and his voice was louder now. He pointed at Lisa and repeated his earlier point. 1 ship against 300. He demanded to know what kind of weapons humanity possessed that could accomplish such a thing. His tone suggested he thought humans must have stolen advanced technology from someone else. Lisa smiled, but the expression was thin and cold. She said that humans had the kind of weapons they developed during their own wars. Humanity had spent 10,000 years fighting itself. Humans got very good at warfare during that time. When they finally achieved unity and stopped fighting each other, they did not forget all those hard lessons. They just redirected that knowledge and experience toward other purposes, like defending themselves from external threats. Narux's metallic skin seemed to flush with color. He demanded to know if Lisa was threatening the council. His voice rose with anger and perhaps a bit of fear. Other representatives shifted in their seats and watched the confrontation carefully. Lisa's expression did not change. She said no, she was not threatening anyone. She was simply explaining the situation so there would be no misunderstandings. The Defiant was one of 12 battleships in the human fleet. Earth also had 200 cruisers, 500 destroyers, and 1,000 smaller vessels of various types. Humanity was not interested in conquest. They were not interested in domination or building an empire, but they would absolutely not be bullied by anyone, no matter how powerful that species claimed to be. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the translation system seemed to pause. Valara's crystalline form seemed to dim slightly as if the light passing through her had weakened. She asked what humanity's intentions were for the future. Her tone suggested this was the most important question that needed to be answered. Lisa's voice softened just a little. She said that humans wanted trade with other species. They wanted diplomacy and cultural exchange. They wanted to learn from older civilizations and share what they had learned. These were the same things humanity had been requesting for 5 years, while the Galactic Council debated whether humans were worthy of acknowledgement or official recognition. The delay had not been about gathering information. It had been about pride and prejudice. She let that statement hang in the air for a moment. The silence stretched out and representatives looked at each other uncomfortably. They all knew it was true. The council had delayed recognizing humanity, not because of any real concerns, but because they did not want to admit that a young species deserved equal status. Lisa continued speaking. She said that Commander Morrison would proceed to Earth with his ship. He would not fire unless fired upon first. He would not threaten anyone or make demands. But he would not stop either. And neither would any other human vessel moving through space. Humanity was done asking permission to exist. They were done waiting for approval from species who thought age equaled superiority. Humans would travel where they wanted and trade with whom they wanted. Anyone who tried to stop them would face the same result as the Krithians. Lisa turned and walked out of the chamber before anyone could respond. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. The 2 security officers followed her. The doors closed behind them and 47 species sat in stunned silence. No one spoke for a long time. Representatives looked at each other with expressions that ranged from shock to anger to calculation. The galaxy had just changed, and everyone knew it. The old order was crumbling, and a new reality was emerging. Part 4. The Zorathian Empire was not accustomed to being ignored or treated as irrelevant. For 6,000 years, they had controlled a region of space called the Persis Expanse. The region was rich in rare minerals and held strategic importance for controlling trade routes. When the Zorathian military leaders heard about the human battleship defeating the Crithians, they did not see it as a warning. They saw it as an opportunity to prove themselves and gain prestige. They believed the Crithian defeat must have been a fluke caused by incompetence rather than human strength. Admiral Crane commanded the Zorathian Second Fleet, and he was considered one of the greatest tactical minds in the Empire. He had won 43 battles without a single loss. His reputation was built on careful planning and brilliant execution. When he heard about the human ship, he issued a formal challenge. His fleet of 80 ships would intercept the Defiant at a place called the Helios Junction. The humans would either retreat and admit they were not as strong as people claimed, or they would be destroyed. Either outcome would prove that the Crithian defeat was not representative of human capabilities. Jake Morrison received the challenge message 3 days before the Defiant would reach the junction. He sat in his ready room reviewing tactical data with his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Greg Peters. The room was small and functional, with screens showing sensor data and strategic maps. Greg had served with Jake for 2 years and had learned to read his commander's expressions and moods. Greg pointed at the data and said that Crane had 80 ships waiting for them. He explained that Zorathian vessels were lighter than the Crithian warships, but they were faster and more maneuverable. The Zorathians preferred hit-and-run tactics and complex formations. Admiral Crane also had a personal reputation for tactical brilliance that was respected across multiple species. This would not be the same kind of fight as the Crithian encounter. Jake studied the information carefully before responding. He noted that Crane had never fought anyone who could fight back effectively. The Zorathians always won through overwhelming force combined with superior tactics. Their enemies were usually outgunned and outmaneuvered from the start. Jake asked a simple question. What happens when overwhelming force and intimidation tactics do not work? What happens when the enemy is stronger than you expected? Greg smiled slightly and said they were about to find out the answer to that question. His tone suggested he was looking forward to seeing how Admiral Crane would adapt when his assumptions proved wrong. 3 days later, the Defiant emerged from faster-than-light travel at the Helios Junction. The Zorathian fleet was already in position, waiting exactly where they said they would be. The 80 ships were arranged in a complex formation that Admiral Crane had designed personally. The formation allowed ships to provide mutual support to each other, while creating overlapping fields of fire that would trap any enemy vessel. It was beautiful in a mathematical way, like a deadly puzzle. Admiral Crane's face appeared on the main view screen. His species was humanoid in basic shape but taller than humans. They had silver skin that seemed to glow faintly and eyes that produced their own light. Crane looked at Jake with those glowing eyes and spoke in a voice that expected obedience. He ordered the human vessel to power down all weapons immediately and surrender the ship for inspection. His tone made it clear he expected compliance without argument. Jake stood at his command chair and looked back at Crane with calm eyes. He said that he was going to give the Admiral one chance to reconsider his position. He explained that this was not because he was afraid of the Zorathian fleet. It was because he would rather not add to the growing casualty count. Too many beings had already died because of pride and arrogance. Jake's voice was sincere. He genuinely did not want to kill more people if it could be avoided. Crane's glowing eyes narrowed and his expression hardened. He said that Jake was arrogant for someone whose species was so young. Humans had barely left their home system, and already they were acting like they owned the galaxy. The Zorathians had been spacefaring for thousands of years. They had forgotten more about warfare than humans had ever learned. Jake acknowledged the point with a slight nod. He said that maybe he was arrogant, but he was also right about what was going to happen. He gave Crane one last chance to withdraw his fleet and avoid unnecessary bloodshed. His tone made it clear this was a genuine offer, not a bluff or a threat. Crane's response was immediate. He ordered all ships to open fire and destroy the human vessel. His voice was sharp with anger at being challenged by someone he considered inferior. The Zorathian fleet attacked in coordinated waves. each wave timed perfectly to follow the one before it. The tactics were precise and demonstrated why Admiral Crane had his reputation. It was beautiful to watch in a terrible way. But brilliance based on outdated assumptions is just elaborate failure dressed up in impressive planning. The Zorathians assumed the human ship would behave like other vessels they had fought. They assumed their weapons would have predictable effects. They assumed their tactics would work because they always worked. All of those assumptions were wrong. The Defiant accelerated straight into the Zorathian formation instead of trying to evade or retreat. The ship's shields absorbed the initial barrage of weapons fire without any visible damage. Then the human battleship began demonstrating capabilities that the Zorathians had not anticipated or planned for. The Defiant made micro-jumps using faster-than-light technology in ways that should have been impossible. Each jump lasted only a fraction of a second, but allowed the ship to appear in different locations across the battlefield. One moment the Defiant was here, the next moment it was there and Zorathian weapons were firing at empty space. The railgun continued its methodical work. Each shot destroyed a Zorathian vessel completely. The weapon fired with mechanical precision, never missing, never wasting a shot. New weapons revealed themselves as the battle continued. Torpedo salvos launched and then split into dozens of smaller submunitions, each one tracking a different target independently. Particle beams lanced out and sliced through armor plating like it was paper instead of advanced alloys. Electronic warfare systems activated and suddenly, half the Zorathian fleet could not see or hear or communicate properly. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan coordinated countermeasures from her station. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls. She reported that the Zorathians were trying to jam human communications. Their electronic warfare systems were quite sophisticated and under normal circumstances might have been effective. Jake told Amy to show the Zorathians what real jamming looked like. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. The politeness was gone. The Zorathians had been given their chance and they had chosen violence. The Defiant's electronic warfare suite activated at full power. The systems were designed by a species that had spent centuries developing ways to disrupt enemy communications and sensors. Suddenly, half the Zorathian fleet was blind, deaf, and confused. Ships could not see where they were going. They could not hear orders from their commanders. Their sensors showed phantom targets that did not exist and missed real threats right in front of them. Zorathian vessels collided with each other because they could not see their own allies. Weapons fired at illusions. Orders went unheard and formations fell apart into chaos. Jake watched the destruction for several minutes and then gave an order. He told all weapons to cease fire immediately. The Defiant's guns fell silent and the ship came to a complete halt in the center of the devastated formation. Debris floated all around them. Zorathian ships were damaged and venting atmosphere. Some were drifting without power. Others were trying desperately to escape. Jake told Amy to hail Admiral Crane. The communications officer worked quickly to establish a connection. Admiral Crane appeared on screen and his glowing eyes were wide with shock. His silver skin had lost some of its luster. His ship was damaged and emergency lights flashed in the background. Everything about his posture and expression showed defeat and disbelief. Jake spoke quietly, but his words carried across the void of space. He said that Crane had lost 30 ships in less than 15 minutes. The Defiant was stopping now because Jake wanted the Admiral to understand something important. He said that humans did not want to be enemies with the Zorathian Empire. They did not want to conquer territory or destroy civilizations. But humanity would defend itself against anyone who attacked them. He told Crane to take his remaining ships and go home. He should tell his people exactly what happened at the Helios Junction, so they would understand the truth. Crane said nothing for a long moment. His glowing eyes stared at Jake as if seeing him for the first time. Then he gave a short nod of acknowledgement and cut the transmission. The screen went dark. The Zorathian fleet began withdrawing, their ships limping back toward their own space. Many were damaged badly and would need months of repairs. All of them were carrying survivors who would tell stories about the day they fought the humans and barely survived. Greg stepped up beside Jake and asked quietly if he thought the Zorathians would listen. Would they learn the lesson or would they just come back with more ships next time? Jake continued watching the retreating fleet on the sensors. Part 5-6 months had passed since the Defiant encountered the Crithians and then the Zorathians. Ambassador Lisa Grant stood before the Galactic Council once more, but this time everything was different. The great amphitheater on Concordia Station felt the same physically, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Earth now had a proper seat at the main table instead of standing in the observer section. Humans were not asking for permission anymore. They were participating as equals with full rights and privileges. The chamber was quieter than it had been during previous sessions. Species that had dominated the galaxy for thousands or even millions of years now looked at the human representative with a mixture of respect and wariness. Some showed curiosity in their various ways. Others displayed calculation as they tried to figure out how this change would affect their own interests. But none of them showed the dismissive contempt that had been so common just months ago. High Speaker Valara called the session to order with her resonant crystal voice. Her body refracted light into patterns that seemed more subdued than usual. She addressed the assembly formally and explained that they were gathered to officially recognize humanity as a sovereign spacefaring civilization with full rights and privileges under galactic law. The recognition had been inevitable after the Defiance encounters, but making it official still felt momentous. She asked Ambassador Grant if she would like to say anything to mark the occasion. Lisa stood and her posture was relaxed but confident. She had waited 5 years for this moment. She had endured dismissal and condescension and bureaucratic delays, but she showed no trace of bitterness or triumph. Her voice was calm and professional when she spoke. She thanked the High Speaker and said that her people had only one message for the Council and for the galaxy beyond. Humanity came in peace, but they were not defenseless. They sought friendship with all species, but they would not accept subjugation from anyone. They offered trade, knowledge, and cooperation to all who approached them with honest intentions and mutual respect. She paused and looked around the chamber slowly. Her eyes met the various forms of perception that different species used. She wanted everyone to understand that her next words were not a threat, but a statement of fact. She said that the USS Defiant would continue its patrol routes through contested regions of space. Other human ships would join the Defiant in this mission. The purpose was not to conquer or intimidate anyone. The purpose was to ensure that all species, including humanity, could travel freely through space without paying tribute to self-appointed warlords or being threatened by aggressive empires. Ambassador Narooks of the Villani stood up from his seat. His metallic skin no longer showed the anger that had been so visible during their previous encounter. Instead, his demeanor suggested grudging respect, mixed with practical concern. He asked what would happen if other species objected to the human presence in their regions of space. It was a fair question and one that many representatives wanted answered. Lisa's response was simple and direct. She said that objecting species should remember what happened to those who tried to force humanity to leave or pay tribute. The Crithians had tried to collect payment and they lost nearly half their fleet. The Zorathians had tried to intimidate and destroy and they lost 30 ships. Humans did not look for fights or seek confrontation, but they would finish any fight that someone else started. The pattern was clear and the lesson was available to anyone willing to learn it. The chamber remained quiet after Lisa's statement. No one seemed eager to challenge her words or test human resolve. The silence stretched out for several seconds before Valara spoke again. She said that the Council accepted humanity's stated intentions and welcomed them as full members. She hoped that this marked the beginning of a productive relationship that would benefit all civilizations. Her crystalline form flickered with colors that might have indicated hope, or perhaps relief that the crisis had been resolved peacefully. Halfway across the galaxy, Jake Morrison sat in his ready room aboard the Defiant. The ship was currently in a peaceful sector conducting routine patrols. Jake reviewed reports and handled the administrative work that came with command. The reports included maintenance schedules, crew evaluations, and intelligence briefings about various regions of space. The ship was scheduled for a refit in 2 months. After that, they would head out to explore regions called the Unknown Territories, areas where no major power had yet claimed control or established presence. A chime sounded at his door and Jake looked up from his work. He told whoever was outside to come in. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan entered carrying a data pad. She had been organizing the communication logs and found something interesting that Jake needed to know about. Amy reported that they had been receiving messages from civilian freighters. 3 separate convoys had sent requests asking if the Defiant could provide escort service through Crithian space. The merchant vessels were nervous about traveling through regions where they might be attacked or forced to pay tribute. They had heard about what the Defiant did and thought that having a human warship nearby might protect them. Jake smiled slightly at the irony. He asked Amy what she had told the merchants. It was important that the response be appropriate and consistent with human policy. Amy said that she told them she would check with the commander first. She had also explained that humans did not hire out as mercenaries or sell protection services. The Defiant was a military vessel, not a private security company. She wanted to make sure the merchants understood that distinction before making any commitments. Jake nodded approval of how Amy had handled the initial contact. He said that was a good answer and showed proper judgment. But he told her to go back and tell the merchants yes anyway. The Defiant would provide escort if the timing worked with their patrol schedule. He explained that they were not acting as mercenaries. They were acting as peacekeepers. There was a fundamental difference between those two roles. Amy nodded to show she understood the distinction. She turned to leave but then paused at the door. She looked back at Jake with a thoughtful expression. She asked if he really thought it was going to work. She was referring to the whole approach of speaking softly, but carrying overwhelming force. Would other species eventually accept humanity as equals? Or would this just create new enemies who resented human power? Jake considered the question carefully before answering. He said that the approach had worked on Earth eventually. It took a long time and there was a lot of pain and learning along the way. But humanity finally figured out that strength combined with restraint was better than either weakness or tyranny. Maybe humans could help the galaxy skip some of those hard lessons that Earth had to learn the painful way. Amy pointed out that they might also just make new enemies who were angry about being challenged. There were always those who preferred the old order because it benefited them. They would resist change no matter how reasonable it seemed. Jake admitted that was possible. There would definitely be species and individuals who became enemies because they resented human power, or felt threatened by change. But he said those enemies would at least be enemies who respected humanity. They would be enemies who understood that attacking humans came with serious consequences. That was better than being ignored or treated as inferior. Respect could eventually turn into understanding and maybe even friendship. Contempt never led anywhere good. Amy left to send the response to the merchant convoys. Jake turned back to his reports and continued working. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled by in their eternal dance. The light from distant suns had traveled for years or centuries to reach this spot. Somewhere out in that vast darkness, other species were recalculating their strategies and reassessing their assumptions about humanity and about the galaxy itself. The Lords of War had fallen silent after encountering the Defiant. They had learned that humanity would not be another species to exploit or dominate. Humans would forge their own path through the stars. Anyone who tried to stop them or force them to submit would discover what 10,000 years of human warfare had created. Not conquerors who wanted to rule over others, not tyrants who enjoyed causing suffering, but warriors who understood that true strength was not found in dominating the weak. True strength was found in protecting the innocent and standing firm against those who ruled through fear and intimidation. The USS Defiant continued its patrol route through space. Behind the battleship, the galaxy was changing in ways both small and profound. Trade routes that had been controlled by warlords were opening up to free commerce. Species that had paid tribute for generations were questioning why they continued to submit. Young civilizations were watching humanity and learning that it was possible to stand up to bullies. The old order built on fear and dominance was beginning to crack. It would take time. Change always took time. There would be more fights and more challenges. Some species would test humanity to see if the reputation was real or exaggerated. Others would seek alliance and friendship. A few would become genuine enemies who needed to be watched carefully. But the fundamental truth had been established and could not be reversed. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy. The darkness of space stretched endlessly in all directions, cold and silent except for the distant light of stars that had been burning for billions of years. In the Tertius system, something unusual was happening that would change the galaxy forever. 300 warships floated in formation, each one massive enough to block out entire constellations. These ships belonged to the Crithian Empire, a civilization that had ruled through fear and force for countless generations. Their vessels were covered in weapons that could turn planets into dust, and their armor was thick enough to survive almost any attack. For 6 complete cycles around the local star, these warriors had stopped every ship that tried to pass through their territory. They demanded payment from everyone, The proud Villani Confederation had given them mountains of platinum. The mighty Zarathian Empire had handed over their most advanced weapon designs. Even the ancient Qualics, who had witnessed stars being born and dying, had surrendered their pride and delivered rare materials that took centuries to collect. The Crithian fleet waited with the patience of predators who knew their prey had no choice but to come to them. War Regent Thulos commanded this armada from his flagship, a vessel so large that small moons would seem tiny beside it. His 4 eyes scanned the sensor displays that covered the walls of his command center. Hundreds of officers worked at stations below him, monitoring every ship in the fleet and watching for any vessel that might try to pass through without paying tribute. Thulos had led armies for 300 years, and never once had anyone refused his demands. The thought that someone might try made his mandibles click together in amusement. Far away but getting closer, the USS Defiant moved through space like a knife cutting through water. The battleship was nothing like the massive Crithian vessels. It was smaller and sleeker, with a dark hull that seemed to swallow light instead of reflecting it. The ship moved with purpose and precision, following a course that would take it directly through Crithian territory. On the bridge, Commander Jake Morrison stood with his hands clasped behind his back and watched the view screen showing the formation of enemy ships ahead. His crew of 200 worked quietly around him. Each person knew their job perfectly, and no one needed to shout orders or ask questions. They had trained together for years and trusted each other completely. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan sat at the communications station, and her fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease. She looked up at Jake with calm eyes that showed no trace of fear, despite the 300 warships waiting ahead. Her voice was steady and professional when she reported that the Crithian flagship was sending them a message. She asked if the commander wanted to hear what they had to say. Jake nodded once and told her to put the message on the main screen where everyone could see and hear it clearly. The view screen flickered and changed to show the face of War Regent Thulos. The Crithian's 4 eyes blinked in sequence from left to right, a gesture that his species used to show dominance over whoever they were addressing. His mandibles clicked together loudly, creating a sound that was meant to intimidate. Behind him stretched the enormous bridge of his flagship, filled with hundreds of officers and crew members. The sheer size of his command center was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Thulos spoke in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. He addressed the unknown vessel and commanded them to stop immediately and prepare to be boarded by Crithian soldiers. His words were not a request, but an order that he expected to be followed without question. He declared that all species must pay tribute to cross through Crithian space, and this was law that could not be broken or ignored. His 4 eyes stared at the screen as if he could see through it to the humans on the other side. His mandibles spread wide in what looked like a smile, but was actually a threat display that showed rows of sharp edges. Jake Morrison leaned forward slightly in his command chair. His expression remained completely neutral, and his voice was calm when he spoke. He introduced himself as Commander Jake Morrison of the United Earthspace Navy. He stated simply that they were passing through this system, and they were not going to stop for anyone. The words were polite, but the meaning was absolutely clear. The humans had no intention of following Crithian demands or paying any kind of tribute. Thulos made a sound that might have been laughter. His 4 eyes seemed to glow brighter, and his mandibles spread even wider. He told Jake that the human ship was alone, and the Crithians had 300 warships. He asked if Jake understood basic mathematics, suggesting that humans were too primitive to count properly or understand how badly outnumbered they were. The insult was deliberate and meant to provoke either fear or anger. Jake's expression did not change at all. His voice remained perfectly calm and steady. He said that he understood mathematics just fine and had no trouble counting. Then he asked Thulos a question in return. He asked if the War Regent understood consequences. The question hung in the space between them for a moment, simple but carrying enormous weight. Before Thulos could respond, he cut off the transmission himself. The screen went dark and returned to showing the view of space ahead. Across the Crithian armada, alarm systems began to sound. Officers shouted orders and crew members rushed to their battle stations. Weapon systems that had been on standby suddenly came to full power. Energy signatures bloomed across the Defiant's sensors like deadly flowers opening their petals. Each signature represented weapons charging up and preparing to fire. There were hundreds of them, and all were targeting the single human ship that had dared to refuse Crithian law. Lieutenant Ben Harris worked at the weapons console and looked up at Commander Morrison. His voice was professional when he reported that the Crithians were preparing to fire at them. He waited for orders, but his tone suggested he already knew what Jake would say. The crew had served under Morrison for 3 years now. They had learned how he thought and how he made decisions. They trusted his judgment even when they did not fully understand his plans. Jake spoke quietly and gave an order that surprised no one on his crew. He told Ben to let the Crithians get a complete weapon lock on the Defiant. He wanted them to commit fully to their attack. He wanted them to believe they were about to win easily. The bridge crew exchanged quick glances, but no one questioned the command. They had learned that Jake Morrison always had a plan, and his plans always worked even when they seemed strange at first. The first volley of plasma bolts launched from the Crithian fleet. Bright streams of superheated energy crossed the void of space at incredible speed. Each bolt carried enough power to vaporize a building, or punch through the armor of most ships. Dozens of them screamed toward the Defiant from multiple directions, designed to overwhelm any defensive systems the human ship might have. The Defiant's point defense systems activated instantly. Hundreds of small weapons fired in perfect coordination, creating a storm of interceptor fire around the battleship. Every single incoming plasma bolt was destroyed before it could reach the shields. The explosions lit up the darkness like fireworks celebrating some great festival. Not one shot made it through the defensive screen. Jake Morrison watched the display for 3 seconds and then spoke again. His voice was still quiet and calm, as if nothing important was happening. He said that the Crithians had taken their turn, and now it was time for the humans to respond. He told Ben Harris to return fire and to target the Crithian flagship specifically. He wanted to send a message that would be understood clearly by everyone watching. Ben Harris confirmed the order with a simple acknowledgement. His fingers moved across his console, and the main railgun of the USS Defiant charged up in less than 1 second. The weapon was completely different from anything the Crithians had ever encountered. It did not use energy or plasma or any exotic technology. It used simple physics and enormous amounts of electrical power. The railgun fired once and the sound vibrated through the entire ship. A solid metal projectile accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. It crossed the distance between the two ships in less than 1 second. The projectile struck the Crithian flagship exactly in its center mass. It punched through 6 layers of heavy armor plating as if they were made of paper instead of advanced alloys. The kinetic energy was so massive that when the projectile reached the ship's main reactor, the resulting explosion split the entire vessel in half. The flagship broke apart in a brilliant bloom of fire and debris that expanded outward in all directions. The explosion faded slowly and debris scattered through space. 300 Crithian warships sat motionless and did not fire. Their weapons were still charged and ready, but no one gave the order to shoot. The entire armada had fallen completely silent. In 300 years of conquest, they had never seen anything like this. One shot from one weapon had destroyed their most powerful vessel and killed their supreme commander. War Regent Thulos might have survived in some protected section of the ship, but his flagship was gone, and his authority was shattered along with it.